Imagine this scene for a second. You've just left a funeral or a wake for a loved one. The atmosphere is just incredibly heavy, it's dark out, and you are completely emotionally exhausted. You're walking towards your car, just wanting to finally go home and get some rest, when an older relative leans over and quietly says, "Hey, don't go straight home. We need to make a stop first." Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're diving into a deeply rooted cultural practice from the Philippines called Pagpag. And we're actually not going to look at this as some kind of ghost story. Instead, we're going to explore the profound science, the psychology, and the deeply human behavioral patterns that are hiding just beneath the surface of this ritual. So it really all comes down to one core question, right? Why can't you go straight home? Well, to understand the behavior, we have to look at the basic premise of the tradition. The ancient belief dictates that if you go directly back to your house right after attending a wake, a lingering spirit, or maybe just the general misfortune associated with death, might actually follow you right through your front door. So to stop that from happening, mourners make a mandatory stopover somewhere else first. It could be a brightly lit convenience store, a 24-hour fast food joint, a coffee shop, really anywhere that isn't their house. By taking this detour, the idea is that you confuse the spirits and leave all that bad energy behind. And that brings us perfectly to the name of the practice itself. The word pagpag literally translates from Tagalog to mean shake off or remove. Think of a really dusty, dirty rug. If you want to clean it, you don't just gently brush it, right? You take it outside, you hold it up, and you vigorously flap it around to shake all that dust and debris loose. That highly physical act of removal is exactly what mourners are metaphorically doing during this stopover. They're stopping in a neutral location to actively shake off the bad energy, the lingering fear, or those wandering spirits before they safely step back into the sanctuary of their own home. Now, Pagpag doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It's actually part of a much larger, really intricate ecosystem of death traditions that are all meant to protect the living. Take a look at some of these other common funeral rules. You see things like covering up mirrors so you don't accidentally catch a glimpse of the departed soul looking back at you. There's a really strict rule against sweeping the floor during the wake because, you might accidentally sweep away the spirit or even invite another death into the family. And absolutely no bringing leftover food home from the funeral. These practices all share the exact same roots. They're traditional mechanisms, born way before modern science, designed to navigate the incredibly delicate and honestly terrifying boundaries of mortality. And to see just how deeply ingrained these practices are, consider this quote from the folklore archives. It's from a 57-year-old homemaker who actually grew up with the tradition. She recalled that her mother always made them stop on the way home from funerals. And when she asked her mom if skipping the practice would actually cause something bad to happen, her mother simply replied, "Better to be safe than sorry." So the crucial takeaway here is that this isn't necessarily about a literal, terrifying belief in ghosts for every single person. For many folks, like this homemaker who still does it today, it's just a deeply embedded cultural reflex. It's something done out of pure habit and respect for tradition. Let's look at the psychology of grief and how this is really just a human response to death. You see, when a community experiences a loss, the human brain essentially enters a state of extreme cognitive overload. Grief brings on this intense anxiety, paralyzing fear, and a really terrifying loss of control. Death is the ultimate unavoidable uncertainty. It is completely out of our hands. So how does the human mind cope with all that terrifying chaos? Well, it creates structure. It creates rules. There is a really fascinating contrast here. On one side, you have the supernatural belief, confusing wandering spirits. But right beneath that is the actual psychological function, which is regaining emotional control. They essentially accomplish the exact same goal. The brain desperately craves agency when it feels helpless. By performing a specific, structured action, like purposefully routing your drive to a coffee shop before heading home, people are actively doing something to supposedly protect themselves. It takes this completely uncontrollable, devastating situation and gives the grieving mind a tangible sense of agency and control. So let's look a little closer at the specific psychological benefits of these rituals. Why do they fundamentally help us? Well, first, they drastically reduce anxiety by giving us a predictable sequence of events when literally everything else feels completely unpredictable. Second, they provide this profound comfort through familiar, repetitive actions that generations before us have done. And third, they help us navigate existential fear. When we're faced with the overwhelming reality of our own mortality, having a set of rules just gives the mind a safe path to walk on. We're not here to debunk the superstitions or judge anyone's beliefs. Rather, it's just fascinating to see how the brain naturally seeks out this incredible psychological comfort. Now, let's explore community and social bonding. This is what we can call the emotional pause. Because beyond just the psychology of the individual mind, Pagpag serves a massive, vital social function for the group as a whole. Grief is, by its very nature, incredibly isolating. It makes you want to just retreat. But this tradition fundamentally prevents that isolation by forcing the community to stop, pause, and stay together just a little bit longer. Think about the modern post-funeral timeline for a second. Step 1 is the wake. This is the heavy, emotional, exhausting period where you're facing the reality of death head-on. Step 3 is the return home, where you walk through your front door and you're finally left alone in the quiet with your own thoughts. But right in the middle is Step 2, the stopover. The Pagpag. Whether it's gathering in a brightly lit 24-hour diner or just a local convenience store, this middle step acts as a totally necessary emotional decompression zone. It breaks up that harsh transition from the intense public grief of the wake to the lonely, isolating silence of being at home. There's this insight from the folklore archives that perfectly captures that social dynamic. A 51-year-old IT worker explained that the tradition, quote, offers emotional decompression after an emotionally taxing event. And if you think about basic human nature, it makes total sense. After a devastating loss, our instinct is to kind of pack together for warmth and safety. By stopping for food or coffee, mourners get to sit around a table, they might share some quiet laughs, tell stories about the person they lost, and just silently check in on one another. The tradition literally mandates social support exactly at the moment when vulnerable people need it the absolute most. Which brings us to the concept of liminality. It's a fantastic term, basically defined as the boundary, the threshold, or that transition space between two states. In this context, it's the boundary between life and death. Culturally speaking, Pagpag acts as a bridge between ancient indigenous animism, where spirits are very active in the world, and modern Catholicism. But from a purely behavioral standpoint, the ritual beautifully disrupts the path of uncertainty. It acknowledges that you can't just flip a switch and go from grieving straight back to normal life. You need a buffer. You need that liminal space to safely guide you, step by step, back to the world of the living. So why does the tradition survive? Why is it so much more than just a superstition? As we kind of reflect on everything we've looked at so far, we have to ask ourselves, why, in our modern era of smartphones, advanced medicine, and AI, does this ancient practice remain so incredibly popular? Why do young, skeptical people still do it? Well, because, as we've seen, it goes way beyond ghosts. The tradition survives today because of family tradition. It survives out of a deep respect for elders who find real comfort in those rules. And honestly, most importantly, it survives because it is a highly effective communal coping mechanism. Even if you don't believe in literal ghosts, even if you view the world entirely through the lens of science, you're still going to stop for coffee with your family after the wake. Because the simple act of being together, of hitting pause before facing the quiet of your own home, is universally healing. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to pose one final question to you. Does Pagpag actually work? Well, science obviously cannot measure wandering spirits. We don't exactly have instruments to detect if an entity is following your car home, but if we measure working by the tangible emotional relief it provides, if we measure it by the reduced anxiety, the comfort of routine, and the powerful community bonding it creates, then yes, absolutely. The comfort and the psychological protection it offers are measurably, undeniably real. Because at the end of the day, when a family gathers together in a diner at 2 in the morning after saying a final goodbye to someone they love, they aren't really trying to shake off a ghost. They're collectively trying to shake off the heavy, universal weight of human grief. And isn't it fascinating how human culture organically designed the perfect psychological tool to help us do exactly that? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. It really leaves us with a profound thought to chew on. If our minds and our cultures can organically build such beautiful tools to protect us from the pain of loss, what other everyday routines are secretly carrying the weight of our humanity? Keep asking questions and keep learning.